What's up YouTube? My name is Griff and welcome to my Protection Warrior guide for patch 8.0.1. Now, this is probably gonna hurt, but I'm gonna have to say it anyways. Protection Warrior is just fine for Mythic progression, and I'm sorry to tell you this, but if you're having issues in Mythic or anything lower, it's most likely not the class and it's just a player issue. The good news is though, that a player issue is fixable with some effort, of course. The bad news is that if you're the average player, you're probably playing this class wrong, but again, that's easily fixable. So let me clarify something real quick, because I don't want to give you the wrong idea. Protection Warrior is viable, and you can do +10s, and you can even do past +10s with the Protection Warrior. You're just going to have to work harder than other tanks. Now, you're also going to be able to do Mythic Uldir progression. Perfectly okay. In fact, we're probably much better suited for a raid environment than we are Mythic Plus. Don't skew what I'm trying to say here, and take it like I'm trying to say Protection Warrior is literally the best tank out there. It's not. But it is viable, and it is perfectly able of doing top tier content right now. So let's address some things really quick regarding the community perception behind Protection Warrior. A lot of people say that Prot can't be good because it doesn't have self-sustain. This point is completely countered by the lesser amount of damage that we take when compared to other tanks, and we also have some of the highest effective HP, and on top of that, we're easily the best at actually mitigating physical damage as long as we have our mitigation rolling. So if you take a look at logs for tanks on Warcraft logs, and you factor in self-healing and look at damage taken per second and effective healing required per second, it's pretty much about the same between Protection Warriors and a quote-unquote top-tier tank class like a Blood DK. The second thing that I want to address here that the community loves to harp on is that Ignore Pain being on the GCD is a problem. While I in some ways can understand the sentiment, in all reality, Ignore Pain being off the GCD would only further trap new players into bad habits. And on top of that, we don't currently have the rage generation or ability to stack Ignore Pain like we used to in Legion. So honestly, having that ability off the global cooldown wouldn't really do much except for allow us to maybe get an extra cast of Devastate out. So, long story short, what I want to say here is that if you want to use your brain while tanking and be a Thunder God rolling around and literally making your DPS cry because they see your damage numbers on AoE, then stay tuned in and I'll teach you how to become the ground stomping and yelling ball of thunder that you can be. If you don't feel like actually putting in effort to be able to stay alive, and you don't like the idea of your personal mistake being able to get you killed, then there are 5 other unathletic window-looking tank classes that will suit your needs. So let's jump right into it. If you're going to be the WoW version of Thor mixed with Anita Sarkeesian's penchant for yelling at people you deem hostile, then you gotta look the part. If you're not sporting some dope transmog that makes you look good, then you're beyond any help I can give. You gotta look good to play good. Stat priority. This is a pretty straightforward area. It's mainly going to be haste, armor, versatility, mastery, crit, and then strength. I'm not really going to go into what each stat does here, but what I am going to tell you is that in general, your item level is more important than your stat priority. For the most part, all of our secondary stats are close enough in value, and strength also gives us both extra armor and stamina that any item level upgrade is going to realistically be an upgrade for you both damage and survivability wise. There's only one real caveat to this, and that's rings. If you have a 5 item level upgrade on a ring, but you go from say best in slot stats to say your worst stats, then it's okay to sandbag the item level. However, I really wouldn't recommend sacrificing anything more than 5 item levels unless it has a socket. In which case it might, keyword on might here, be worth sandbagging up to 10 item levels. In general though, use your best judgment here. Personally, I generally just equip any item level upgrade in ring slots because the closeness of all the stats really makes it about an upgrade. That being said, I will touch on why we actually want haste And yes, I know I said I wouldn't get into all the other stats, but haste is actually really important. It lets us reduce our GCD, which means we're going to be able to get more abilities off, so we're going to have more rage, which also means more resources to spend defensively. But even more importantly, it reduces the cooldown of our active mitigation, shield block. So with this being said, if you have 2 pieces of the same item level, I'd obviously recommend going with the piece that's going to give you more haste. Now, as far as gearing is concerned, your shield is your lifeline. Your shield is by far the most important piece of gear that you can possibly get. So, if you get a good shield, it does not matter what the stats are. If it is an item level upgrade, take that shield. Doesn't matter if you lose haste, doesn't matter if you lose a gem. The block value, the armor, the strength, the stamina, all those things alone are going to make you a better tank. Protection Warrior lives and dies on block. Block is our mitigation, so naturally anything that bumps up our block stat is going to be a net increase for us as players. On to talents. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say it now. There is only one build for Prot with only minor deviation. Do yourself and your group a favor and don't try to color outside of the lines. It's a bad idea, and your group, and more importantly you, will thank yourself for not doing it. So let's take a look at the talents. For tier 1, you're pretty much always going to want to go for Into the Fray. The obvious reason is it's really hard to beat haste. Now, there's one point in which you would actually change from Into the Fray into Punish, and that's if you cannot maintain 2 or more stacks of Into the Fray, and if the boss actually does consistent single target damage that you absolutely need to mitigate. The problem is here, it's almost always going to be possible for you to get at least 2 stacks of Into the Fray, so you're pretty much always going to be locked in here. For tier 30, this is actually a flexible tier. You can choose Crackling Thunder if, for example, you're doing Zek Vaz and you want to get extra damage onto the ads when you're in Avatar. It's really great. It does an amazing job for actually helping you in those situations. Bounding Stride is probably going to be your default here. It's pretty simple. It just reduces the cooldown on your heroic leap, and it also makes you run a little bit faster after you heroic leap. This is really useful for stuff like Mythic Plus because it lets you disengage from a fight and kite a little bit to let your healer catch up. It's also useful on raid fights because it's even more mobility added up over the entire duration. And then finally, you have Safeguard. It has some uses, but it's going to be very, very niche. But basically, it just means it's going to modify your intercept, which is your charge a little bit. And it's going to allow you to do a little bit of extra damage redistribution for your group. So, for example, in Atal Dazar, if you're in that dungeon and you're doing Mythic Plus, if somebody gets targeted by Razan to do his little chomp chomp thing, or any sort of boss target ability similar to that, you can charge to that friendly, and they basically get a 30% damage reduction. The thing is, it's going to transfer the damage to you, so your healer needs to be ready for it. In 45, you're pretty much never going to leave Unstoppable Force. Unstoppable Force is amazing. It makes your avatar a huge component to your spec, and it buffs your Thunderclap damage by 100% and also reduces the cooldown by 50%. So what that means is every other global cooldown you can Thunderclap. So you can go, for example, Shield Slam, Thunderclap, Devastate, Thunderclap, Shield Slam, Thunderclap, etc. Like continually just going like that. It's a huge rage generation tool, which also means it's going to help you defensively. On the 60 talent row, Bolster is the only viable option. It reduces the cooldown of your last stand, by 60 seconds, and it also allows you to block all melee attacks for the full duration. What that means is you can literally have a period of, I believe it's 16 seconds. Let me check that real quick. Yes, you have a period of 15 seconds where not only do you have higher health, and not only did you receive a heal from that higher health, but you're also blocking every single blockable attack for the next 15 seconds. It's amazing to allow your shield blocks to recharge. Onto the 75 tier. This is, again, the only other flexible tier. As a default, I usually go with Rumbling Earth. And basically, it just brings back the old thing on Shockwave, where if you hit 3 targets or more, the cooldown is reduced by 15 seconds. Alternatively, Stormbolt is actually really useful in Mythic Plus. It allows you to not only have an AoE stun, but also a 4-second single target stun on a 30-second cooldown. Your last option here is Menace. It can be useful because it basically allows you to fear your enemies without them running away when you use Intimidating Shout. So it could be useful in an AoE interrupt situation, but some mobs are unreliable here, and on top of that, Fear in general, in my opinion, is really unreliable because as soon as damage starts ticking, it breaks. So on the level 90 tier, you're locked into Booming Voice. You are going to 100% take Booming Voice. It's amazing. It makes Demoralizing Shout, an already really, really good cooldown, into an even better cooldown. It also helps you smooth out your rage generation. You're going to get 40 rage from this, and it's going to allow you to do 15% extra damage to any targets that are afflicted. And then finally, in the 100 row, Anger Management is the only viable option. So every 10 rage you spend here, you're going to reduce the cooldown on Avatar, Last Stand, Shield Wall, and Demoralizing Shout by 1 second. This means that Prot has the ability to continually rotate cooldowns, which allows you to really just go after it and have these periods where you literally just almost aren't taking any damage. And on top of that, it means you're bringing up things like Avatar, which is a huge AoE DPS boost for you, up even faster. So with Anger Management, it just helps you fill all the gaps that you might have when your normal mitigation is on cooldown. So up next, we're going to talk about Azerite Traits. Azerite Traits are pretty important to Prot, and for the Outer Ring, I'm basically going to tell you what your best in-slot traits are here. Outside of Uldir, you're going to want 1 Deafening Crash and 2 Brace for Impact. Inside of Uldir, you're going to want 1 Deafening Crash, 1 Brace for Impact, and 1 Archive of the Titans, or alternatively, you can also use Laser Matrix. I'm going to tell you right here that you are never, ever going to conceivably get rid of Deafening Crash for the foreseeable future. It doesn't matter how much of an item level upgrade the piece is, Deafening Crash is simply too viable. The only time you're actually going to upgrade a piece that has Deafening Crash on it is if you receive another item with Deafening Crash on it. That is the only time. Now, I understand it's not always conceivable to get your best in slot traits, so let's go ahead and go on to the other outer ring traits that you have available to you. Iron Fortress is going to be a close second, and it's going to be right behind Brace for Impact. Then, after that, it's going to be Bloodsport, followed by Callous Reprisal, and finally, Reinforced Plating. None of these traits are inherently bad, so an item level upgrade with any of these should be a decent trade out for any of your non-Deafening Crash pieces. On to generic traits as far as the outer ring is concerned. They're not worth it. Don't go for them. Just stick to the protection specific ones. And always make sure that you have at least 1 Deafening Crash piece. So for the middle ring, there are way too many for me to cover each and every one, so I'm just literally going to paste a list up on screen right about now. And you can go ahead and pause it whenever you would like and take a look at it, but this is going to be your middle ring priority. Now, finally, with the inner ring, it's getting the same exact treatment. So I'm going to place it up on the screen here in about 2 seconds, and feel free to pause and take a look. But this is in order of from greatest to least. Alright, so now on to the rotation. So, as far as Protection Warrior is concerned, there are really 2 rotations that you have. Your first rotation is going to be out of Avatar rotation priority, and your second one is going to be inside of Avatar rotation priority. So when you're outside of Avatar, your priority is as follows: Demoralizing Shout, Shield Slam, Thunderclap, Revenge if you have the proc, or if you need to spend excess rage and you're not going to need to smooth incoming damage with Ignore Pain. And then finally, Devastate, and that's only going to be if everything else is on cooldown and or you don't have rage to spend. So, your inside of Avatar rotation is actually pretty much the same. The only difference is going to be that when you are in Avatar, Thunderclap becomes your highest priority damage dealing ability. So your rotation priority would look like this: Demoralizing Shout, Thunderclap, Shield Slam, Revenge with proc, or if you need to shed rage, and then Devastate. So on your opener, it's going to look something like this. You're going to go ahead and you're going to hit Avatar, you're going to charge in, you're going to Thunderclap, you're going to hit your Demoralizing Shout, you're going to do another Thunderclap, you're going to do a Shield Slam, you're going to do a Thunderclap, all of these things, and you're just going to keep going like that. You're just going to keep alternating every other global cooldown with a Thunderclap during your Avatar opener. Now that being said, when should you use Shield Block? Well, essentially Shield Block should be used whenever there is going to be physical damage incoming that is blockable. So for example, the boss's auto attacks, or something along the lines of a boss ability that is blockable. So anything that is blockable, you're going to want to use Shield Block on. Now if it's not blockable, you're going to want to use Ignore Pain on it, and on top of that, if it is a magic ability, you're also going to want to use Spell Reflect. Now, when you don't have any more charges of Shield Block up, that's when you would want to start rotating cooldowns. So, Last Stand is going to be a great one. So whenever you pop Last Stand, you're going to want to make sure that you're not going to press Shield Block, because your Last Stand is already blocking all the attacks that are blockable for you. So it gives you a great time to recharge Shield Block, and then once that's over, you can go back into using Shield Block. So once you run out of Shield Block charges again, you're going to want to hit Shield Wall, and that's going to provide you with a 40% damage reduction for the next 8 seconds, which is equivalent to blocking. So you really don't need to use any Shield Block charges while that ability is rolling, and it's another thing that just allows you to get your Shield Block charges back up. So what this should translate to is, when you're doing a raid, there shouldn't really be any period of time when you're tanking the boss, because for the most part there's a lot of swaps anyways where you don't have any sort of mitigation up. On top of that, you want to make sure that you're not capping on rage. Spending your rage is really important here, because like I said earlier with anger management, every 10 rage that you spend, you're shaving off an extra second on cooldown for abilities like Demoralizing Shout, Avatar, and more importantly, your defensive abilities like Shield Wall and Last Stand. So I think right now is probably a really good time to talk about the interaction with Deafening Crash and your rotation and how that really affects you as a player. So we've already established that Demoralizing Shout is both a DPS boost for you while also being a damage reduction as well. So normally Demoralizing Shout only lasts 8 seconds on the target. Well, with Deafening Crash, every time you thunderclap, it extends the duration of your Demoralizing Shout on that target. Now the trait doesn't stack, so it's only useful to have one. Well, the damage stacks from Thunderclap, I should rephrase, but the actual effect lengthening does not stack. So with that being said, this is where lining up your cooldowns becomes really important. That's why you open with Avatar and then Demoralizing Shout. If you do this correctly and you line those two up perfectly every time they both come up, you can have above 70% uptime on that debuff on a boss. It's really crazy, I know, but think about that. That is a 20% damage reduction that is up for 75% of the fight. That's huge. So what you're going to want to do is, when you have Demoralizing Shout up on the target, Thunderclap becomes your highest priority. Which is why I said, when you're in Avatar, every other global needs to be Thunderclap. Now, the way this works, because of the cooldown reduction and whatnot, and the fact that Demoralizing Shout is on a naturally lower cooldown than Avatar, means that after your first opener, where you Avatared and Demoralizing Shout, you're going to be able to use Demoralizing Shout once again in between your next Avatar. So as soon as it comes back up after your opener, pop it as soon as possible. It's a huge influx of rage, and it's going to help you continue kind of keeping the damage really it's going to help you keep the damage really manageable for the healers. So then if Demoralizing Shout comes back up and Avatar is, say, I don't know, 10-15 seconds until it's back up, you're going to want to wait until Avatar is off cooldown. And you're going to pop Demoralizing Shout, Avatar, and you're going to go back into that rotation where it's Thunderclap ability. Thunderclap ability. The next thing that I want to say is, do not use Devastate all that much. Devastate simply exists to be there so you have a button to press when everything else is off cooldown. Or on cooldown, I mean. I've seen a lot of protection warriors that will do that. It ends up hurting you in the long run because it means you're not generating range. So if you're not thunderclapping and you're not shield slamming and you're devastating, you're hurting yourself overall. So with that, all jokes aside, here are my closing statements on Protection Warrior. Protection is a fairly decent spec. It just takes some effort to actually play it correctly and get the results that you want. It has a decently high skill floor, so what's going to happen is you might start playing it and it's going to take you a little bit of time to adjust. You're going to need to adjust, you're going to need to get comfortable with it, and you're going to need to start understanding that you need to know what's going to happen with the boss before it happens. So what does that mean for you? You're going to need to get weak auras. You're going to need to get some sort of a boss mod that will have timers that will allow you to see what's coming up. And then you're also going to want to adjust your UI so that most of your stuff is centralized. If you don't do that, you're not going to be able to be a successful protection tank. I'm sorry, it's just not going to happen. Because at the end of the day, the way that you play protection properly and the way that you're going to get results is by knowing what's going to happen and being able to stop the damage from coming in before it happens. Protection's job isn't to heal up the damage that they take. It's to stop that damage from happening in the first place. So I wish you luck. If you have any more questions, please let me know down in the comments, or stop by the Skyhold Discord. I'll leave a link down in the description. There's a bunch of protection warriors in there. There's a lot of great guys, really high-end raiders, and people that have actually pushed 8 out of 8 Mythic Uldir as protection warriors. So if you see that you still need help, go ahead and check these resources out. Check out Icy Veins. These are all great resources. But I hope this helped. Peace.